But mate, as I said before we started recording, had a bit of a chat and identified a few things that you've learned along the way. And one of the things you said to me was that when it comes to line to leader connections, you've always been a bit of a PR, not sort of a guy, because we all know that's the strongest knot you can possibly tie, but you've changed your tune on that a bit.
Yeah, it's a bit of a fiddly knot to tie, and it's certainly not a quick knot, but in terms of breaking strength, that's probably the strongest. I think it normally wins in a head-to-head against FG as well. So those would be your two most popular knots, your PR or FG. But I had an incident one day where I caught a pretty decent fish, and it floated up under the boat. As you know, once these big fish float from about 40, 50 meters down, they tend to kind of move around a bit. It came right up under the boat, and my line actually got caught in the prop and just got cut. So no issues with losing the fish because they can't swim back down. So we went back and got it. But we were in a bit of a hot bite, so I couldn't be bothered to sit there and tie a PR knot. We went straight back up the drift and dropped again. So I quickly tied an Albright knot, which I used to use years ago when I sort of first started out. Pretty good knot. And fished 2 or 3 drifts and caught some more fish, and then unfortunately got snagged up. And when I was using the PR knot, if you got snagged on the bottom, it was a nightmare because you just couldn't break it. It was very rare that it would actually break at the connection. It would break somewhere in your line, and more often than that, that might be a weakness where you might have crossed lines a few trips ago, or worst case, it might snap off at the rod tip. But on this instance, it cut literally right at the knot. So when it cut off, I tied another Albright knot and fished again for another few hours, and I got snagged again at the end of the day, and it broke in exactly the same spot again. So 2 out of 2, I was thinking, well, that's pretty good. I'm going to remember that. So since that trip, I've exclusively used the Albright knot, which certainly wouldn't be my favoured connection. But what I've found is it has that ability under extreme pressure. Like if you lock it up and you're kind of driving the boat and, you know, holding the drag on your reels, it doesn't move. The mechanics of the knot seem to cut into itself and actually cut it off where it's joined. So yes, you're losing your jig and your leader, but you're not losing potentially 300 or 400 meters of line at once, which is what was happening to me before. So that's been a huge kind of bonus in terms of obviously not going through so much gear, and just one of those things I found out by accident, you know?
Yeah. And look, you know, for those who maybe haven't listened to previous episodes, 358 and 445 in particular, just give us a bit of a run through on line and leader strength, mate.
Yeah, and again, you were saying, got my own products and stuff. So the line, I played around with. I started off with PE2, a couple of brands, and it was okay, but I found when I was hooking a big fish, more often than not, you get busted off, or you just couldn't hold it on the amount of drag you could put through that line, and they'd get you in the bottom. So it's a fine balance between that thin line, and then if you go too heavy, it's too thick, because people don't really understand when you're fishing in that sort of 280 to 400 meter depth, even when the current's only 1.5 knots is getting up there before it becomes a bit difficult. But the difference between you fishing, say, a PE3 line and a PE6, your lure will be trolling out the back of the boat. If you fish with PE6, the current just grabs hold of it and your line's almost horizontal. So it's been a fine balance, and I think we've settled on the best line size since PE2.5 or PE3. On a really calm day, you can probably get down PE4, but there's definitely a difference. You're having to back up the boat more to stay vertical over your jig. So again, that's been a trial and error. And the lighter you go, or the thinner you go rather, the easier it gets down and the easier it is to fish. But then you're at the risk of just, as soon as you hit a big fish, you're in trouble. So it's a bit of a gamble.